Hi there, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Karen Fabian, and I'm so glad you're here. I know you've got limited time, so thanks for spending some of it with me. Whether you're a brand new yoga teacher, currently in training, or you've been teaching for years, this podcast is for you. My goal is to help you feel like teaching can be easy, fun, and a natural extension of who you are, rather than something you have to do the right way, whatever that is, or something that feels like you have to work hard at it all the time. This isn't a podcast where I'll be telling you what to do or critiquing your teaching. Instead, I'll share frameworks, skills, and techniques you can experiment with to see what works for you, especially when it comes to understanding anatomy, cueing, and sequencing. I'll share ideas that may challenge what you believe about what it takes to be a yoga teacher. All I ask is that you keep an open mind, because some of what I share may sound different from what you've heard. We'll also talk about the mindset of a confident teacher, not only because it's such a big part of empowered teaching, but because it's rarely discussed. With that, welcome, and let's get into today's conversation. Hi there. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, and this is episode 404. I'm recording this on May 14th, 2026, and this will go live on the 18th. And it is just the start of the summer. So I'm kind of wondering, what are your plans for the summer? I'd love to know if you've got any cool vacations planned or even a staycation. So definitely drop me a line on Instagram and let me know. The other thing I wanted to share is in my last episode, I shared with you how I did a yoga teacher meetup, and I live in Boston, so we did it here in the Boston area, and it was just so great. And I think the teachers that came had a nice time. I had a great time. It was just a great way to connect in real life. So I wanted to throw out there, if you live in the Boston area, and the first Saturday in June is open for you at noon from 12 to 1. Send me a DM on Instagram and let me know that you're interested in coming to the next yoga teacher meetup, because I'm sort of eyeing that date to do it. The other thing I wanted to ask is if, again, you live in the Boston area, I've been dying to do a live training. And I sort of have my eye on a place I've used before, which is in Cambridge, called the Masonic Hall. And I have a date in October, a Saturday in October, that I'm interested in reserving it for. So I'm curious if that would be something you'd be interested in. It would be a live event. It would be a way to learn how to apply anatomy to your cues. It'd be a really interactive workshop, probably run from something like 10 to 4, and would include my blueprint workbook. And we would walk through how are we actually applying anatomy in real life, in real time, in our classes, through the cues we use and the sequences we offer. So while we'll go into some of the anatomy, we're really going to spend a lot of time applying it. Now, if you've already taken my accelerator program, this would be a perfect complement to that with a live training. If you haven't taken my accelerator program, this would be a way to sort of jumpstart your anatomy knowledge in terms of sort of jumping you to the end game, the application of it. And then at the end of the training, I could even offer an incentive to enroll so you could really complete your learning by taking the program after. So again, it would be in October, it would be in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And if that's something that you're interested in, I'd love to know. So you can just send me a message on Instagram. So today we are going to have, I think, what I hope will be an interesting experience for you. I don't think I've actually done this sort of thing before. And I want to just give you just a tip. If you are sitting down in a place where you can write your answers, that will be really helpful. And I think it will make experiencing this episode much more meaningful. Because what I'm going to take you through is a self-guided experience to help you sort of ground into, or not ground into, ground down. No, that's not even the right phrase. To help you, I guess, maybe stop for a moment and check in with yourself in terms of how things are going as a teacher. And the reason that I'm I'm offering this opportunity to you is because number one, everybody's busy. And I feel like once you get done with your 200-hour training and you start teaching, you're in the mindset of teaching, teaching, teaching. And it doesn't matter how many classes you're teaching. I didn't mean it like that in terms of volume. It's just that you get into this cycle of teaching and you don't oftentimes stop and take stock of where things are at. And so this is an opportunity for that. So, just from a high level, let me ask you, have you ever felt like teaching should feel easier by now, but it actually doesn't? And instead of questioning, why does it not feel easy? You just assume this is part of being a new teacher. Or maybe you think, well, I just don't get it. Or maybe you think, there's just something wrong with me. I'm too old. I can't learn. This is too complicated. I'm not qualified to do this. I didn't want to do this anyway when I went to my teacher training, and then I decided to teach, and now it's just proof that I can't do it. Right? So any of those feelings are relevant and valid and real. And so from a high level, that's the overall question. Have you ever felt like teaching should feel easier by now? So if you've got your journal out, just write yes or no. Okay. Now, here is sort of my thoughts on this. A lot of struggles that yoga teachers experience aren't things you have to suffer through, they're solvable problems. But a lot of teachers, and I can say this from the experience of talking to lots of teachers over the years, they think that there's something wrong with them, or they think that the problem is unique to them. And so they just suffer in silence. They just stay in the state they're in, and they don't the problem doesn't get solved. The feelings don't resolve. Matter of fact, it only sort of builds and really can get the teacher to the point where they're feeling like I'm just not cut out for this. Now, let me also add in here, this is not a conversation, just for someone that might be really struggling. It's also a conversation for a teacher who's feeling like, hey, things are going pretty good. So I want you to keep an open mind. And even though I'm talking about some examples of teachers who might feel like this is really not working out for me, I want you to also keep an open mind. And if you're feeling like things are, maybe 80-20, like 80% good and 20% not so good, this is still going to be a revealing exercise for you. So, in this episode, I'm going to walk you through a series of questions. This is not a test, there are no right or wrong answers. What this is a way for you to take an honest look at how things are going for you as a teacher. And who doesn't want a chance to do that, right? I mean, if we're not willing to stop every couple of months and just ask ourselves some important questions, then we're just sort of in this mode of spinning our wheels. And for a lot of teachers, the spinning of the wheels is what makes teaching feel hard. So as you listen, I want you to notice where things feel really grounded and solid and right and just in a good place for you, and where things feel uncomfortable or frustrating or confusing, because those are the areas where you can shift those areas so that you can feel clearer and more confident. And that's, of course, a large part, if not the biggest part, of what I do when I work with teachers. This is really a chance for you to start to unearth those things. And again, the reason I'm saying unearth is because a lot of times teachers will just, they're in a problem state, but they tell themselves this is just the way it has to be. And honestly, that's in large part because a lot of the things they hear from other teachers is, oh yeah, this is what I went through a similar thing when I was new, or oh yeah, I've experienced that too. Just kind of keep doing what you're doing, it'll shift. And when I hear stuff like that, that just really bothers me because there is always a different approach that can bring you more clarity and confidence. And it's really a bummer, I think, when teachers say to other teachers, oh, you just have to suck it up and deal with it. That is definitely not an approach I espouse. So again, if you have a journal, great. If you're not able to write down, that's okay. Maybe go back and listen to this again. So the first one is section 1. This is like the starting point. So first question, when did you start teaching? When did you start teaching yoga? What inspired you to teach yoga? And you might want to pause this to have time to write your answers down. What inspired you to teach? You know, we want to start from that place. We don't want to start from the problems. We want to start from the positive. What inspired you to teach in the first place? And even if you took your training to learn more about yoga, at some point along the way, you decided to teach. So what changed? What inspired you to teach yoga? When you signed up for your 200-hour training, was it harder or more confusing than you expected? When you signed up for your 200-hour training, was it harder or more confusing than you expected? And remember, there's no right or wrong, and I want you to be, no one's going to see what you write. So I want you to just be as honest and truthful as possible. When you graduated from your 200-hour training, did you feel prepared to teach? I really don't want to add a lot because I don't want to lead you to a particular answer. So remember, if you didn't feel prepared, that is not saying really anything about you. I mean, obviously, if you slept through the whole thing or skipped a bunch of sessions, that does say something about you. But if you were there and if you were paying attention and you didn't feel like you were prepared to teach, that says something about the training. Like, isn't that just logical? And it doesn't even mean the training was bad or the teacher that led it was bad. It doesn't mean that. It just means sometimes that the way it was formatted and the way it was done was not helpful to learning. I mean, learning is a neuroscientific skill. And you have to understand when you're teaching a teacher training how the brain works, how people learn. And a lot of teachers that lead trainings don't put that into consideration. They think of it as a purely academic task. Here's a list of things that Yoga Alliance tells me I need to cover, and I'm going to cover them. And that's why so many teachers say, I feel overwhelmed. I fell asleep in my training. It was hard to keep my eyes open. I just feel like it was so much stuff. So again, be honest. All right, so section 2, this kind of gets into the reality of your teaching. What skills do you wish you had a better handle on? And I want you to think of skills in terms of the things you're doing in your class. You're sharing cues, you're creating sequences, you're offering modifications, you're answering student questions, maybe you're assisting students. Like, what skills do you wish you had a better handle on? Next question. How close is what you're currently teaching to what you want to be teaching? And you can think about this in terms of the sequence, the temperature of the room, the poses, the music, the format, the length of time, the style of yoga, right? How close is what you're currently teaching, who you're teaching? How close is what you're currently teaching to what you want to be teaching? And remember, go back to what inspired you to teach yoga. Okay. Number 3, how easy does it feel to teach your classes? How easy does it feel? And I know you're going to have a gut reaction to this one, so be honest. Next question, how authentic and real do you feel when you're teaching? And I'll give you an example. You know, when you go to a party and you're not really in the mood to like be at the party, and so you kind of put on a face like, okay, it's totally fine, everything is fine, but underneath you really don't want to be there and you're, maybe a little disappointed in yourself that you agreed to go. You really wish you could have stayed home and watched Netflix. I mean, that's not a perfect example. Another example might be, and I really don't want to give you teaching examples because I don't want to lead you. So think about you as a person, the things you love about yourself. How how real, how much do you feel like when you walk in the room, you are exhibiting those ways of being? And I'm not talking about the things you don't like about yourself, because we all have things we don't like about ourselves. Like the person that says, I'm a perfectionist, and they don't like that about themselves, but they attach to that identity. Think about the things you like about yourself. You're humorous, you're a calming force, you're a clear speaker, whatever comes to your mind. How authentic and real do you feel when you're teaching? Because again, when teachers feel like they're performing or pretending or putting on airs or trying to be like their mentor, they're not actually teaching as themselves. And yet, most teachers that I talk to say, I wish I could feel more like myself when I'm teaching. So, again, how authentic and real do you feel when you're teaching? So, section 3 gets into time, preparation, and overthinking. All things that teachers don't really think are problems. They just accept as part and parcel of being a teacher, which I am going to emphatically tell you is not true. You do not have to put up with any of this stuff. You don't have to put up with spending a bunch of time. You don't have to put up with spending hours prepping every week. And you definitely don't need to put up with overthinking. So I want you to be honest here. Question 1, how many hours do you spend preparing each week? And that includes writing out the sequence, researching what you're going to put in the sequence, practicing the sequence at home, looking stuff up on Google, whatever. Question 2, do you find yourself thinking or worrying about teaching when you're not actually teaching? Like obsessively thinking about the classes or what you're going to do in the class or what happened in the class. Question 3 for this section. When you accept a sub request, do you regret it later? And in fact, as the date approaches, do you get more and more anxious as the date approaches? So the insight here is, yes, we want to be prepared, but over preparation is oftentimes connected to being a perfectionist and feeling like if I control all the things I'm going to do, that's going to help me feel more confident. When in fact, trying to control everything leaves you no mental space for being present. Now, I don't want to get into a lot of solutions here in this episode. This is really not about me sharing solutions. In this episode, this is about identifying problems and having you really take ownership of the problems you have rather than buying a lot of the garbage that teachers are fed, which is, oh, this is just stuff you have to accept. This is just stuff that's part and parcel of being a yoga teacher, which I totally do not agree with. So, section 4 is about comparison and confidence. So, first question, do you take other teachers' cues and use them as your own? Because you assume, well, that person used that cue, that must be right, or that's a cue that sounds interesting, I guess I'll use that. And especially if you don't understand the cue and you just defer authority to the person you heard it from. Do you compare yourself to other teachers? Maybe you're taking their class and as you're taking it, you're getting triggered, comparing yourself. Well, why don't I do that? Or maybe I should do that. Or maybe I should add this sequencing stuff into my class. Or maybe you compare yourself in terms of how many people they have in their class, and you're thinking, well, they have more people than I do. Next one. Do you feel expert and qualified when you teach, or do you feel like an imposter? Next question. When you're done teaching your class and you're driving home or walking home, do you find that you replay your class in your head and that critical thinking comes out where you're questioning, did you do a good job? A good enough job? So this is all super common stuff. And again, this is I'm being forthright with you because I want you to start to take ownership of these things and really stand up for yourself and say, honestly, to yourself, we're not putting up with this anymore. Section 5 is about anatomy and skill gaps when it comes to applying anatomy to your teaching. And I could go on in this section, but I just kept it to 2. When you're sharing anatomy-based cues, like cues about maybe you literally use a muscle name, or you're talking about a joint movement, or you're talking about a bone, or you're talking about connective tissue, fascia, ligaments, or you're using things like don't do this or don't do that, or you say things like this could create an injury. Can you explain why? Do you understand the why behind your cue? Like if somebody came up to you and questioned you on the cue you just shared, hey, you said open your heart. What does that mean? Or hey, you said contract the core. What muscle are you talking about? Would you be able to answer? Do you know the why for the anatomy-based cues that you share? If you looked at pictures of 5 different yoga poses, could you look at each pose and identify the joint actions, the muscles that create those joint actions, and the cues that you would use? I mean, think about how many things you're saying, like reach your arms up, reach your arms back, tilt your pelvis forward, hug your inner thighs together. All of those cues speak to the anatomy. But so many teachers don't understand the anatomy. They don't know that reach the arms up is shoulder flexion, right? And again, I'm not going to get into solutions. This is just about identifying problems. Section 6 is about fear and emotions and like the pull on your emotions. First question, do you worry about students getting hurt in your classes, especially if they're beginners? Do you worry about being judged by another teacher if another teacher takes your class? And do you find when you're teaching, you're obsessing about what that person might think of how you're teaching? If you get feedback from another teacher that feels like it's critical, does that hurt your feelings? Do you find that you take that personally? Do you often ask students for feedback, as in, did you like it at the end of class? So again, all of these things, yoga as an industry is very grounded in this model of giving feedback. Again, I don't really agree with that for the most part. I have a very different view on feedback. And again, I'm really holding back from sharing too much. So let's just kind of stay in, you're doing this assessment. All right, section 7 is about you're looking for solutions, but you might feel stuck. So first question, do you buy books hoping to feel more confident? And do you buy books and spend a lot of time in self-study reading these books, hoping that you're going to find the answers that you're looking for? Do you find that you're scrolling online, looking at different training programs and thinking about maybe even retaking your 200-hour training, either at the same place or a different place? These are signs. When someone is in this stage where they're actually seeking other training programs out, what that actually means is you're ready to fix the problem. You're in a much more ready state than someone who hasn't gotten to that point. So I want you to add that in to this particular section. So we're almost done. Section 8 is alignment and vision. If you could teach the way you really want, what would that look like? Like if you had no holds barred, if you didn't care what anybody thought, if you had all the courage you needed, if you didn't worry about people's judgments, if you had the skills that you don't have now that you know you need, what would it look like? Are you teaching in the kind of location and space and studio or whatever location you're teaching at that is a fit for you? And remember, this is not to say anything bad about where you're teaching in the studio. I'm just asking you. You're in charge of what you're doing. Are you teaching in a place that's a good fit for you? Next question. Do you feel like your classes are adding value to the people who come to your classes? Do you feel like your classes are adding value? And extra credit if you can articulate what value are you adding? All right, home stretch here. Section 9 is about identity and support. Do you feel isolated as a teacher? Or do you feel like you have someone you can reach out to if you feel stuck or you need support or you have a question? If you were to run into somebody at Starbucks, you're standing in line, you just get to chatting, and you mention to them that you're a yoga teacher, how would you describe how you teach? How would you describe what you offer? For instance, say that person says to you, "Oh, I'd love to come to your class. Can you tell me what it's like? What can I expect if I come to your yoga class?" What would you say? And so now we've come to the last question. What is stopping you from teaching the way you want to teach right now? What is stopping you? And I want you to be really honest, like painfully honest. Even if your answer is something that you feel embarrassed about or you feel shame around, I want you to be really honest. What is stopping you from teaching the way you really want to teach right now, like in your very next class? So I want you to just take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. And I want to thank you for being willing to take this self-assessment sort of questionnaire, because not a lot of teachers are going to get to the point that you are at right now, meaning this completion of this journey. I hate that word, not journey, this completion of this exercise. You know, a lot of people probably bagged out of this episode back before, but you didn't. And so that tells me that there's something about this process that was compelling you to continue. And so that's a sign that I want you to really sort of make note of. So remember, if you answered yes to things like over preparing, feeling like an imposter, not understanding your cues, constantly comparing yourself to others, obsessing, thinking about your classes all the time, worrying about what people think, all of those things are not part of teaching. They're not part of normal teaching. They're not things you have to accept. They're not things you have to outgrow. They're not things, like a lot of the things have to do with mindset. So even if you retake your 200-hour training 10 times, that's not changing your mindset. That's just layering more and more and more knowledge on your brain, in your brain. That doesn't change how you feel. Okay, so I want you to make that distinction. And this is exactly why I support teachers in this sort of dual way, the building of the knowledge, the application of the knowledge. And really, it's a triad, and the mindset, because confidence doesn't come from just building more knowledge. It comes from, how am I going to apply the knowledge? And how can I shift my mindset to one of greater confidence, which oftentimes means having some really important conversations about how I view myself as a person. So, if this episode made you realize that there are gaps that you want to close, I will link to my program at the end. But this is not about that. It's not about kind of enrolling you in my program. It's 100% about having you start to take ownership of where you're at as a teacher, rather than sort of shooing it off as just part of what you need to accept. When I talk about my program, I talk about it in the context of helping you be the teacher you want to be. At some point, I have to literally talk about it as a program and literally say the word link because how else am I going to talk about it? But make no mistake about it. It's not about enrollment. It's about me helping you shift into being that teacher. Like that last question I asked, what's stopping you from teaching the way you really want? For a lot of people that listen to this episode, including you, you may have an answer to that, but you may not know how to bridge the gap between where you are now and where you want to be. And that's where I can help you do that. And for a lot of teachers, they need help to do that. And there's no shame in that. And no amount of hours oftentimes is going to bridge that gap. It's a different path to get there. So I hope that this was revealing for you. I really do. Because, the win for me is having you recognize that some of the things you may be experiencing are solvable problems. They're not personality statements about you or identity statements about you or something about you're not smart enough or you're too old or you're not flexible enough or you can't do the poses that you're teaching. It's not about any of that. I hope that this brought to the surface some of the things that you've been seeing and feeling and just sort of saying, I have to accept this. And now I hope you're feeling like, you know what? I don't need to accept this. That's total BS. I can take ownership of these problems by recognizing them, and I can take active steps to solve them. That's a teacher who is in action mode. And teachers like that will not be stopped. And they will teach in a way where they are feeling like I am teaching the way I want to teach. And I feel great and it feels easy. And all those worries I had, and all those pressure points I had, and all that time I spent prepping, and all that time I spent obsessing about my classes, I don't do that anymore. So I want you to imagine teaching like that. If there was like a spiritual backpack filled with all these weights, I want you to imagine with every subsequent piece of sort of empowered learning, you're dropping those weights one by one by one by one. And now you have no spiritual backpack. Now you're walking in to teach your class totally free and easy and loving what you do. Okay, well, thank you so much for making it to the end of this episode. I hope you found this helpful. And if you have any insights that came to you when you were listening to this, I'd love to hear about them. So please don't be shy. Send me a DM on Instagram and let me know. I'll talk to you on the next episode. Namaste. Thanks so much for listening. If this episode got you thinking about a current challenge you're having in your classes or gave you ideas that connect to how you'd like to teach, I'd love to hear from you. I know a lot of teachers try to figure things out on their own by reading books, listening to podcast episodes, geez, even mine, or watching videos on social media. And while those things can be helpful, they don't actually solve the problem. What I've seen in my work with teachers is that problem solving and breakthroughs happen when you reach out for help and get one on one support, not in an hours based program, not in a group training, but in a setting where what's going on with you is the focus. If this sounds like the kind of support that would make a difference for you, send me a message on Instagram at Barebones Yoga or email me at Karen@barebonesyoga.com. Just include the word podcast and tell me what's on your mind, your biggest challenge right now, or something you want to do next but aren't sure how to get started. I'll reply back with a couple of specific things you can try, and if it makes sense, we can hop on a call as well. You don't have to figure it out on your own.